All right, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for part two of this three-part interactive series with the Forest Service and the Nature Conservancy as we continue talking about the role stewardship plays in improving tree health. Last week, we spent some time digging into the research, and today we'll focus on the tools and methods for community-based stewardship research and tree health monitoring. My name is Matt Spitzen. I'm the program manager of the Alliance for Community Trees program at the Arbor Day Foundation. And I'm so happy to introduce you or reintroduce you, if you joined us last week, to your three speakers and session facilitators today. Today, we will continue to hear from Dr. Michelle Johnson and Dr. Rich Hallett, who are both research ecologists with the USDA Forest Service New York Urban Field Station, as well as Rachel Holmes, urban forestry strategist for the Nature Conservancy. I always want to remind you that we are recording this conversation and we'll send out the recording once it's posted. It will also be hosted in the Alliance for Community Trees Member Resource Center, so please reach out to me if you need help accessing this member area. Feel free to ask questions via the chat area on Zoom or by selecting the raise your hand feature on Zoom as well, and we can also unmute you to answer your question. So we'll be sure to leave time at the end for more questions as well. And with that, let's dive into it, and I will hand it off to Rachel Holmes.
Hello, everybody. So good to see so many of the same folks from last week. We are so thankful to have this time with you again today. I really appreciate all of the effort that Matt has put into scheduling us, and I also really just want to extend my thanks to you all, the Alliance for Community Trees members. We are so grateful to have time with you. And like I said last week, more importantly, we're grateful for all the work that you do to protect our trees. I'm sure we don't have to tell you that there simply are not enough hands on deck to protect our nation's urban canopy. And so all of the work that you all do day in, day out, whether it's making phone calls, planting trees, mulching, you're just making such a contribution to all of our lives and our health. And I want to thank you for that. And so, so I know that last week we had a really great representation. We had a nice geographic spread. And so what we're really hoping is just to hear from you who's here this week. Because I know there's a lot of folks on. We're just hoping you can use the chat feature to please just say who you are, who your organization or group is, or what group you're representing, even if, large or small, and then where you're joining from. And as I've said before, you could tell us where you're joining from in the world, in the country, or even in your home. That's fine too. I'm sitting in my living room right now, which is great. Awesome. So please keep those chats coming, and we really appreciate your time. So last week on our call, somebody had asked what the point is. What is it that we're trying to do, or what are the goals or outcomes? And one of the things that I wanted to share, and some of you may have been at the Partners Conference last year or last November, where Dave Nowak presented his most recent research highlighting the net present value and the value over time of trees in terms of ecosystem services. And then he evaluated long-lived, short-lived, and moderately lived trees, as well as various sizes. And the one thing that we can tell is that large, long-lived trees provide the best ecosystem services over time. That may seem like a no-brainer, but the thing that I want to point out here, folks, is that we're really looking at the optimum provision of benefits for these trees significantly into their lifespan. So what that means is we have to make sure that whatever it is that we are doing in terms of our planting and stewardship practices ensure that trees at the very least make it through establishment, and more importantly, make it into several decades into their lives where they can actually contribute the most ecosystem services. So as we said last week, there is no way, folks, that our communities and our trees will live long and prosper unless we continue to do our work. And so what I wanted to do with you today, though, is to really drill down a little bit more on what it is that we're trying to do here through this webinar series and in general. And when I say we, I mean the collaboration between Forest Service and the Nature Conservancy. In our opinion, there are sort of 4 components that go into a civic ecology project. And this is just a very, very terse kind of framework. The very first is a management application or a research question. You have to have a need for information. Do you need information so that you can more optimally care for the trees in your communities? Or maybe you have a research question that relates to wanting to understand more about the relationship between an input and an output. If I use this sort of mulch, is it going to be more beneficial to root growth over time? Or if I spend this much time at each tree, will there be a higher, payout in terms of ecosystem services? So those research questions and those management applications are really what drives the need for information. The second piece that we need are clearly the people that have the interest and are willing and able to gather the data. And that is any number of people. We've just included a very terse list here: volunteers, students, researchers, practitioners, any number of people that have a vested interest in our urban canopy and are willing to go out and collect the data. The next piece is the tools, or are the tools themselves. And that's not just tools for data collection. Obviously, we've got apps, we've got data sheets, we've got lots of different ways to gather data, but then we also need tools to help keep ourselves trained up on the most cutting edge methods to be able to gather valid data. And then the last piece is experimental design. Now, experimental design is on a range. You can have everything from more intensive managed experimentation, as if you were to do a funded research project for publication, or you may have a slightly lighter touch experimental design so that you can get a truly representative sample of the trees or the communities that you're trying to understand. But the bottom line is that having some sense of how and where and when you're going to collect your data is critical to being able to answer some of those questions, or being able to use that data for management application. So all those components taken together, equally important, obviously feed into what we know as a civic ecology project. But then what are the yields of the data for a civic ecology project? And again, very briefly, very tersely, we're sort of identifying three. One of them would be a management application. So, and by the way, the local national is sort of blurred, right? So there are certainly national management applications, and then there are certainly local monitoring applications, et cetera. But the bottom line is we're looking at three things. We're looking at management applications, so being able to prioritize the trees that need our support and our resources and our help the most, the fastest. The second piece, or the second outcome, would be monitoring. So the data that you're gathering will help us identify trends in tree decline so that perhaps we can figure out the next worst pest before it's identified. And then finally is the research project piece. So for example, some of the work that Michelle and Rich are doing, their research could benefit from having additional data and inputs from organizations and groups like you that are out there collecting the data. And that's where, again, a focus on this experimental design really comes in and really is important. Important to ensure that the data that comes in for a research project is valid and useful. So today, what we want to do is we want to zero in on the tools, again, not just for data collection, but then also tools that you might be able to use to engage your constituents in gathering some of these data. And then we also want to touch on and lay a little foundation for what we mean about experimental design. And the experimental design piece is going to take us from the end of this workshop into next week's workshop. And then obviously at the end of this series, our goal, big goal, is for you to be able to take the tools, take some of these questions that we're asking and then you're asking, translate them into a civic ecology project, and for us to be able to work together with the data. So I want to pause there briefly and just see if there are any questions about the goals and the outcome and the process. Again, big picture goal is that by the end of these 3 sessions, we provide you with an overview of the tools and the questions that we're asking, tools that we're providing, some sense of experimental design that can help you set yourself up for a project, and then hopefully work together to get data that can be useful for management applications, monitoring, or a research project similar to what Rich and Michelle are working on. And Matt, I'm just going to ask if there are any questions in the chat that I should look at before we go forward.
Nothing yet, so I think you're good to move forward.
Awesome. All right. And guys, keep those questions coming because Matt is doing an amazing job of documenting and letting us know when they show up. So again, just an overview. I don't know about you, but I like to know where I've been and where I'm going. Last week, we did hear from Michelle and Rich sharing a lot about what the state of what the Forest Service knows regarding tree stewardship, the linkage between tree stewardship and tree health. This week, what we're talking about again is we're going to share an overview of some of the tools and methods that we use, that we have available to you for free, that we encourage you also to take up and use for your projects. And then again, next week, we're going to actually walk through creating a small scale research project for your community using some of the principles and the foundation that we lay today, especially towards the end of the workshop. All right, so before we go any further, what I'd like to do is I would love for everybody to take out their cell phone. It's totally okay. You may want to play Angry Birds if I get boring. Does anybody even still play Angry Birds? Discuss. No? Okay. Well, I play Snoopy Pop, which is probably not what anybody plays. Yeah, I know, exactly. But love for you to download the app. It is not too big, so it's not going to break your bandwidth or your memory. It is available through Google Play for Android devices, and it's also available through the App Store for Apple devices. And you can get there by simply searching for Healthy Trees, Healthy Cities in either of those services. Click download, and then while that's going, I've invited Michelle and Rich to share just a brief overview or recap of some of what we talked about last week for those of us that were not able to join us. So any questions on finding the app before we go forward? Because I really would love for you folks to download it. All right, great. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to share a little bit about the research that she's been, or some of the questions she's been asking with regard to the relationship between tree stewardship and tree health.
Thanks, Rachel. So just to recap from last week, we have some preliminary data we've started applying using the data collected from this app, looking at tree health across New York City and thinking about it in relationship to where stewardship groups are working in the city, and have found a relationship between where tree health is higher, we see that there's also more street tree stewardship groups. But in addition, that's just really at a broad scale level, where are groups working in the city? And we're also interested in understanding more about direct care, so where direct stewardship practices are happening at an individual tree level, which is something you can record with the app under the tree care module that Rachel will talk about later.
Excellent. Okay, and someone just popped up in the chat, a link to Google Play. Would one of you guys, I can't unfortunately click on it, would one of you guys just mind just double checking and making sure that's it? Thank you so much. All right, so thank you for that, Michelle. And similarly, I've asked Rich to give just a quick recap on some of the work that he's been able to do using tree health data as well.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, so this was a study we did, and it sort of stems from a couple of the pieces that Rachel mentioned earlier on. This was based upon a local management need, and we turned it into a research project, which we published. And it was based upon the impacts of Hurricane Sandy on New York City's street trees. What happened during Hurricane Sandy, the first part was obvious. A lot of wind and storm damage blew over a lot of trees. And so we knew those trees were lost. FEMA was able to help New York City with some recovery of replacing those trees and taking care of those downed trees. What we noticed the spring following Sandy was that many of the trees that had been flooded by salt water were declining. They were leafing out later than normal, and the Parks Department noticed this and went to FEMA and said, you know, we've got these trees that were flooded by salt water, and we think that that's causing them to decline, and we also would like some help and some funding to take care of managing these trees. FEMA said, well, you only sampled the trees that were flooded, and you can't prove that the saltwater flooding is what caused this damage. The Parks Department came to us, the Forest Service, and we're part of the New York City Urban Field Station, and said, can you help us design a study to answer this management need? So we set up a study where we looked at 2 species, red maple and London plane trees, and we looked at an equal number of trees that had been flooded and an equal number that had been unflooded to assess the tree health. And we tracked these trees over the course of 3 years following Hurricane Sandy, and found that the flooded trees were worse off, which may seem obvious, but it actually helped the New York City Parks Department obtain some extra funding from FEMA to help with that storm damage. What we also learned was that red maple trees were able to recover over the course of the 3 years of the study. London plane trees, the majority of them did not recover. In fact, 60% of the trees in the study died over the course of the 3 years. So we learned a couple of things that helped the Parks Department and was an interesting research finding. One is that different species have different tolerances to saltwater flooding. Another is that saltwater flooding does impact the tree health of trees, regardless of species. And so we were able to write a paper and have a applied management outcome for the city of New York with this particular effort.
Awesome, Rich, high five, go team. That was concise and perfect, love it. Awesome. All right, you can smile, Rich, great job. There we go, awesome. All right, guys, so here's what we want to do today. And I know that this is a little sacrilegious to put the agenda so far back after we've already talked, but now we are sort of getting into the meat and potatoes of what it is that we wanted to do with you today. So I realize many of you are familiar with apps, and probably if you had 45 minutes or 30 minutes to sit down and play around with it, you'd figure all this out. But there are some capabilities and things that we would like to point out to you in the app that we feel can help sort of shape how you might be able to set up a project for yourself to explore this relationship between tree health and stewardship. So the first thing we're going to do is do just a broad overview of how to use the app and how to document a tree. We're going to then touch base and go into stewardship variables. So those variables that you might collect related to stewardship activities. We're first going to talk about how to enter them in the app, and then some associated training materials that you might be able to use with your constituents if you're so inclined, realizing that many of you have your own materials, but can never have too many options to choose from. Then we'll delve into the tree health monitoring variables that Rich has pioneered with several of his colleagues. He'll talk a little bit about just a very brief snippet of what each of these variables is. And then we will talk about how to do it in the app, and then also some of the training materials that are available to you to help with identifying the details behind, or to help you actually run the tree health protocol. We'll similarly look at our insect disease detection variables, how to use it in the app, and then training materials. And this is all the training materials that are located within the app. We'll then take a minute and I'll walk you through some of the materials that are available on our website that you can also use to put into a training for your community groups. And then finally, we're going to talk about our homework assignment. Yay! Because I'm sure everybody is excited about homework on this session, but there will be a prize involved, so it won't be all that bad, folks. All right, so let's get started. By the way, is anybody having any trouble with downloading the app? And are we? I'm assuming I'm just going to assume that everybody's got it and we're good to go. So here we go. All right. So the very first thing, if you can pull up the app, this is your home page. Once you get past all the screens explaining who we are and what we've done, etc., this is the home page. What we're going to talk about now is adding a tree. Now, when we designed this app, we designed it to be focused on an individual tree. So each time you go to an activity, you'll actually go to this add a tree function. It serves actually as a basic rudimentary inventory function. And in fact, the data that you collect through the add a tree protocol can actually be crosswalked to iTree. So that is something to keep in mind. So the add a tree page which if you click on it, this should come up. This is actually the minimum data set. So for many of you that have done inventories, you know the minimum data set is species, location, and DBH. This particular protocol has 2 additional fields, which includes name and then notes. We also would like you to take a picture. So let's just go through one by one. So name is arbitrary. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it Joe Smith or my favorite tree or, you know, Scruffy, whatever. Or in many of the projects that we work on, we have intentional naming conventions that relate to either the plot or perhaps a nearby address. So if we want to be systematic in naming the tree so that we can keep track of where we are in our survey sampling design, that is one option for you. Or if you're doing this just in your backyard and you want to name the tree for something related to your personal ability to remember where it is, even better. So then you're going to go to species. There's 2 different ways to identify species. You can the species can either be alphabetized by common name or by scientific name. And there's 2 options to choose. You can toggle back and forth. And then location. Location is important. There are several different ways to get at location. The app does find location automatically. However, the app is subject to the level of accuracy of your phone. So you can see here, yesterday, when I took this screenshot, I had 146 meter accuracy. Now, I was indoors, but that obviously would not get me very close to a tree if I'm trying to mark it in my front yard. We'll talk about how to get around that. And then DBH or planting info. And I'll talk in just a second about the 2 different ways you can enter a tree, either if it's existing or if you're planting a new one. You want to take a picture. And then of course, notes. Notes fields come up for most of the modules on this app. And the notes fields have been extremely helpful because they go right into the data set. And so whoever is managing the data will be able to see anything you write, including I need a recheck, not sure about species, noticed something weird, or some, like maybe a message, hey, not the safest tree site, try not, you know, come back another day or whatever. And so DBH, we've got 2 ways to do it. You can either, if you've got a D tape, you can enter DBH, or if you do not, you can also enter a circumference. And then also what I will say is the existing, so the first one is if the tree is existing, you're just entering DBH or circumference. And then if you're planting, you're going to enter the root stock type. So is it containerized, bare root, or ball and burlap? And then if it is a container, you include the container size, or you can include the caliper size. So there's 2 different ways. If you're planting a new tree versus inputting an existing tree, you can toggle on either one. Okay, so let's talk about location. So as I said, your location, your phone or tablet, if it's got cell service, will actually identify your location. However, you're subject to the accuracy of your phone or your tablet or the device. We find sometimes it's perfect depending on where the satellites are. Sometimes you need to kind of bypass it. So one of the ways that we get around this is that we always suggest to use the mapping tool instead of using the phone to identify your point. And so the little pencil is basically your way to override the phone's identifying where you are. It'll pull up a map. You can drag your point around and plot the point exactly where you are. And then the little target button is actually to specify a particular address. But again, the address is going to be based on the accuracy of your phone. So if your accuracy is good, then great, go ahead and use the address tool. But definitely we recommend that people use the little pencil because that allows you to manually input the location of your tree on a map. All right. So, for example, this is one of our New York City office. We have a tree outside. On the left, you see when we use the phone's GPS, it had us like in the building. but the tree itself was about, 50 feet away. So instead, we just used that override, and we were able to drag the point and put it directly over where the tree is. So when you use the little pencil, you actually get a Google image, you get an aerial image, so that also should help you orient where you are. So DBH, all right, so there's two ways to do it. Now, this is assuming you have an existing tree where you would need a DBH, as opposed to planting a new tree where you would have a tree caliper or container size. You can enter, again, either DBH or you can get circumference. Either way, whichever one you enter, the app will automatically calculate it for you. So I know some groups may have D-tapes. Some groups will use maybe string and a measuring tape. Either way, this is, the app is available to make that calculation. All right. So now if you're planting, again, you're going to first indicate whether it's containerized, bare root, balled burlap, and then you are going to add in either the container size or the caliper size. Now, so that's our minimum data set. So that's what we're going to include and input for every tree that we enter into the app. Once you do that, then you can go back and you can do one of these activities. Now, tree care, meaning stewardship, health check, meaning the tree health protocol that we're going to talk about, and then pest detection, or insects and diseases that are potentially in your community. So we're going to go through one by one in terms of how to do this in the app. So as I said before, if you go back to that main menu and you click on one of those modules, this form will always come up. It will automatically open. The app does not assume that it knows what tree you're interested in putting in. So it will ask you to either input a tree, or you can also use the feature called My Nearby Trees or All Nearby Trees. Let's talk about that for a second. My nearby trees would be the trees that are closest to you, where you are right now, that you have input into your into the app through your account or through your device. So let's say I do 7 trees on my property. If I click on My Nearby Trees, those 7 trees are going to come up. Now, let's say my neighbor added 4 trees on his property across the street. She added 3 trees on her property. Next door over here, they added 8 trees. I don't know the math, so it's like 15 or 20 trees, right? So if I were to click on all nearby trees, all the trees that come up that were entered into the app through any account will come up. So all 3 of my neighbor's trees will also come up if I clicked on all nearby trees. And I can then, once I click on either one of those, like let's say I don't want to add a new tree, but I want to go back to either one of the ones that I put in or one of my neighbor's trees, I would click either My Nearby Tree or Nearby Trees or All Nearby, My Nearby Trees or All Nearby Trees. We're good so far? Yes? Okay. Okay, so what I want to start with is when we record an activity in the mobile app, a couple things to point out. A form will come up. We have either tap or pull down menus where you tap to select. We also have buttons that you push. We tried to make it fun, so it's not all one thing, because we know people like pushing buttons. And so each activity has its own form, though, which will guide you through running the activity. Now, one really important piece to point out, so each form has info buttons that have explainers or explanatory points in case you get stuck. So let's say you've perused all of our materials on the variables for the tree health check, but you're still not totally clear when you're in the field. You click on the I button, and that provides you with all of the information related to that particular variable. Now, most importantly, when you get through the protocol, you want to click Save, because that will make sure that the data gets uploaded to the database. All right. Moving right along. All right, so the data itself Quick point, when you enter data, it's almost instantaneously uploaded to the Healthy Trees, Healthy Cities database. So I want to make that clear that when you click save, it gets uploaded into the database, provided that you have a cell or cell connection. Next thing is that the tree health data, especially once you're collecting those variables, it goes into our database, where it then is calculated into a Z-score, which you will get back on your phone. So a stress score that you get back on your phone. Once your data goes to the database, magic is worked, and it comes back to you as a health score. And Rich is going to talk about that in just a second. So also importantly, each data record is tied to a tree, creating a complete history of tree care visits, health checks, and pest detection efforts. It's important to note that when you do a revisit to a tree, the database does not overwrite the previous information. I want to make that clear. So if let's say you want to check a tree every week for 6 months, you'll then have 24 records for your weekly visits, as opposed to one that just keeps getting overwritten. Okay? All right, so let's talk about the stewardship module. Again, that's our first module in the app main menu. And again, this is our stewardship and pruning module. Again, you'll come back to this home page where you can, again, either enter a new tree, or if you want to perform stewardship on a tree that you already inputted, again, you access either through My Nearby Trees, which are the ones that Rachel, put in, or you put in. Or if you want to do stewardship on a tree that your neighbor planted, or a tree on your neighbor's property that they've inputted, then you go to All Nearby Trees. So it just depends on which trees you want to look at. So recording stewardship activities. Now, assuming this is it's a visit, right? A new visit to a tree, we still want you to include name, species, and DBH. And we did that because, this over time, if the tree grows, you want to be able to track that. We also want to make sure that it is in fact still the same tree. So if, let's say the tree has changed, you may need to update species. And so you're going to include DBH or circumference. And now there's two things related to the actual stewardship. Number one is the list of tasks. And then the second thing is the amount of time you spent. So, and we're asking for hours or decimals of hours, like 0.5, 1.5, whatever. This is designed to give you a sense of how long your communities are spending doing stewardship activities per tree. So I don't know if some of you were on the last call where one of Lara Roman's studies mentioned that in Palo Alto, they found that 30 to 60 minutes of stewardship per tree per year yielded better health for those trees. So that knowing the time spent on an individual tree doing stewardship could help you reach conclusions like that. And then this is our this is our list of stewardship activities. And I'll just say right now, let's take a minute and take a look at these. And are there any that you feel are missing on this list? And then let's put them in the chat. So take a look and let us know in the chat if we've missed anything. Okay, how are we looking in the chat? Have we missed any? Okay. All right. So I'm assuming that this is a pretty comprehensive list. And I did note a question in the chat. So just to be clear, and thank you, Jen, the bottom menu of My Trees or My Nearby Trees are of trees that have been put into the app. The app doesn't just know there are nearby trees on its own, maybe removing stakes or tags. No, you're absolutely right. The trees need to be input into the app one of two ways. And now this is important. The app, the app will know that there's a tree that's either been inputted through the app the last part was an answer to what should be added to this list. Ah, thank you. Oh, sorry, maybe removing stakes or tags. Sorry. All right, Michelle, would you mind just jotting that down, please? Awesome, thank you. So okay, so thank you for that, Jen. So getting back to it, a tree will appear for one of two reasons. Number one, it's been inputted directly through the device, whether you're using a tablet or a smartphone. That's one way. And that can be you entered it, your neighbor entered it. Either way, it was entered this way. The second way that a tree will appear is when we're working in a city and we have an organized data collection effort, we'll often upload the entire inventory set that a municipality has into the database, which would then show up on your screen. So let's say as a all nearby trees feature. So let's say you live in Wilmington, Delaware, where we did a project. We knew in advance we were going to be doing this work. We took Wilmington, Delaware's most recent inventory data, we formatted it, and we put it into the app. So if you were to work with us on the project and you clicked all nearby trees, the entirety of, you would have access to the entirety of the city of Wilmington's inventory data and where all those trees are. Does that make sense? Yes, you can do a big, so the question, and this is great, could we do a big batch download of trees if we have the right data? The answer is yes, through our software developer. We actually talked a lot about whether we would allow people to upload data themselves directly to the app. And we made a conscious decision to continue to do it by going through either Rich, Michelle, or Chuck, our app developer, mostly because there are times where the data needs to be formatted. And it would just be really frustrating for you if you had to keep uploading the data and maybe not getting the right fit and not being able to upload it. So by going through us, we can streamline the process and just make it a little bit easier. But thank you for those questions. I'm going to keep rolling. Now, question to you, we do have stewardship materials that can help you and training materials that can help you, not only through the app, but also through our website, which we'll get to in just a second. So I want to just, if you guys get a chance to, look at what we call the hamburger diagram that's available in the top left of the app. And this menu all the way on the left should show up. Now, if you click on resources, you'll get one of two pages. If you go to the videos, you'll see a series of videos that pop up, including a video about tree planting, tree stewardship, and tree pruning. And then if you click on documents, you will then get this menu here on the right, which is a series of printable documents that you can use to facilitate stewardship activities in your communities, as well as a series of presentations related to specific insects and diseases. So now I'm going to turn it over to Rich to talk very quickly about our tree health variables. And now, Rich, if I may, we're not necessarily going into the detail on each of the variables. We do have training materials that you can use to train yourself up on after the fact. So I'll turn it over to Rich.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, just to recap from last week, we're really thinking about shifting the model of tree health assessment away from what's traditionally been done and is currently being done in many places, which is a mortality study. So the tree is either alive or dead, or in some cases, they will rate a tree as to its condition, good, fair, poor, or dead. We're taking the stance that we need more information than that. Just as we do as people, we go to our doctor and we expect our doctor to help us out and tell us more than whether we're alive or dead or good, fair, or poor. We're taking that same model and applying it to our trees. We can move to the next slide. We've taken different variables that are not stressor specific. In other words, we don't need to know why the tree is stressed, but all trees, it turns out, will exhibit certain stress symptoms regardless of species. And we've come up with a way to measure them in a consistent fashion. And again, I'm not going to go into great detail here, but I'm going to quickly go through the variables that we're using in our non-stressor specific tree health assessment. The first one we'll talk about is fine twig dieback. And this is a case where a tree, when it becomes stressed, puts less resources into growing leaves. And in fact, sometimes the fine twigs will die and the leaves will fall off. And you can see in this picture, a portion of this tree has fine twigs and no leaves on it. And so this is one of our stress symptoms. Next slide, please. Leaf discoloration is a little earlier on the scale of stress. It can be caused by some kinds of diseases or nutrient imbalances. Sometimes if there's drought, we see leaf margins turning brown. And so we can capture this variable by assessing the percent of leaf discoloration in the crown of the tree. Another one that we look at is defoliation. This is really only evident when we have some sort of an outbreak like gypsy moth or some other leaf defoliator, but it is important because this is a sign of stress, and with insects eating the leaves, it's a stressor. But also we can have non-biotic stressors such as a big storm or hailstorm, which will take out some of the leaves or put holes in the leaves. And so we capture that in this variable. This vigor assessment uses all the variables that we have in our assessment, and it looks at sort of a holistic view of the crown health, thinking about the dieback, discoloration, defoliation, and then the addition of major branch loss. So this helps us sort of assess where we're at with the health of the tree in a holistic fashion. Crown light exposure is a variable that could be correlated with the other health measures. And it's basically an assessment of how much light the crown of the tree is getting. In city environments or urban environments, we often see scaffolding occluding the crown of the tree, and we can pick that up in this variable. We see in the urban canyon both sides of the tree with tall buildings not allowing light in, and so we can capture that particular condition using this variable. The transparency variable is somewhat related to the fine twig dieback in that it looks at the number of leaves in the tree. This one, though, is sort of, again, an earlier sign of stress. When trees become stressed, they often will either grow fewer or smaller leaves. And when this happens, we can see more light through the crown of the tree, and we'll assess this in various classes as well. And so as you can imagine, with all these variables, you have all these different things, and you could have a lot of leaf discoloration or a lot of fine twig dieback or vice versa. And it's hard to know what to do with that information when you have 5 variables and you're trying to figure out what's going on. And so what we've done with our app is standardize these variables using a z-score technique. It's a statistical technique. It's done in the database, and then we can return a number which will help us figure out where our tree falls on the continuum of stress. And you can see an example on the bottom of this slide from our Hurricane Sandy study, actually, and several red maple trees ranging from healthy on the left to more stressed on the right. And this illustrates the utility of the app and the tree health assessment methodology. And you can see we can get a fairly fine scale of where we are on the stress continuum for our trees. To help with this, we've created some resources, and Rachel mentioned the I button in the app, and the I button will help you with where what the classes are. And in addition, on the resources page on the web page, we have this field guide which you can print out and carry with you in the field to act as a reference. And this is really at the core of our ability to create consistent measurements for tree health, because we have clear rubrics and clear class designations. And ideally, we would have two people measure the same tree and come up with a substantially similar answer with respect to its level of stress. This is what helps us do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rich. All right, folks. So here's what we're going to do now. I really appreciate you guys following with us. What I want to do is give you a sneak peek of a training video that we're working on related to each of these variables. So previously what we've done is we've been in person and done plantings, and thanks, Matt. We've been in person, we've done significant trainings with people, sometimes half a day, sometimes day and a half, but we just can't do that because of travel restrictions and COVID restrictions, et cetera. So we've transitioned into creating a series of videos for each of the variables that Rich just discussed. And I want to share with you guys first one of these videos, not seen by anybody else. And I'm hoping, can you all see my screen? All right, so I'm gonna try this and let's hope it goes. Can't hear it? Crap. All right. Okay, bum deal. I am not savvy with these things. However, well, let me just show you I want to show you some of the animation because it's pretty darn cool. All right. All right. Well, darn it, guys. That's a real bummer to me, but that's okay. That's okay, because the bottom line, folks, is that we have a series of videos that will be done by the end of this month. And again, we are looking to people to help us use the tools and see what we can do with them. So we're pretty confident that that we've worked ourselves out of a training job, that these videos are actually going to be even more effective than we are in our trainings. So in the interest of time, folks, I want to go through the pest detection protocol very quickly to select the option that has used, oh crap, all right. I will do that next week, so thank you. See, this is why you should ask Matt, because he knows everything. But if you there's a teaser. If you guys are willing to join us next week, we'll have even more videos that we can show you because they're really flipping good, guys. Okay, so again, the pest detection protocol, when you click on the little bug on the home page, it takes you to that add a tree page where you can either add a new tree or you can add my nearby trees or one from the list of all nearby trees. And eventually you'll get to this protocol. Again, it's going to ask you to confirm the name and the species of the tree as well as the DBH or circumference. And then you work through each one of these signs or symptoms, which are either pull down menus or presence absence. And again, as I mentioned earlier, each of these has an I button that shows you a fact sheet for what it is that we're asking you to look at. So let's say you're like, what is exudation? I totally forgot. It gives you pictures, it tells you exactly what to look for, which will help you be more effective at gathering those data points in the field. Again, we've got resources under videos. We have several, we've got about 6 short videos, 2.5-minute videos that show you what to look for, the signs and symptoms of insects and diseases. And then we've also got a series of PowerPoint presentations that you can use for your communities if you ever wanted to lead a training. The next thing, we do have a website which we'll share with you. There is a resource library. So we have all of the materials that are on the app, and I'd say about 40% more. We've got PowerPoint presentations, we've got videos, we've got articles. There's a lot more on our resource library that you can take a look at for if you were so inclined to help train others in your communities to support you with data collection. So last thing I want to do is I want to go over some of the homework that we have planned for you. Yay! So what we'd like for you to do is just play with the app. So we went through how to add a tree. And what we would like you to do is add, over the next week, add 5 trees to the app, just 5. We'd like you to add a tree, and we'd also like you to add one of these activities to each tree, whether that's doing a stewardship activity, whether that's conducting the pest detection protocol or the tree health protocol. So we'd like you to do that for 5 trees before next week. Does that seem doable to people? Awesome. And then we also would like you to complete a worksheet. And the worksheet is actually going to serve as the foundation for next week's workshop. So next week is going to be interactive. What we're going to do is provide you with the worksheet in advance that we'd love to get back from you by Tuesday if possible. There is a prize to the first one who sends back the worksheet. And basically what we're going to do is, from those worksheets, we are going to choose one of your projects that we'll work through to set up a project with experimental design and through the project management dashboard. So this worksheet is designed to get you thinking about the sorts of questions that we're going to be talking about on our next worksheet. And I have a note for myself to share the worksheet, which I will do right now. So this is the worksheet, folks. It's very simple, but these are the sorts of questions that we're asking. So are you even interested in a tree monitoring project? If you're not, that's okay. But if you are, we're definitely willing to work with you. We're interested in just understanding what you want to know about your data, or what you want to know about your trees that gathering these data can support. We also want to know if you're currently doing any data collection or monitoring, and then how many people you're working with, etc. So these are some of the basic questions that we're hoping that you will answer, or at least think about. And at the very least, we would love for anybody to share them back with us by Tuesday, and we'll send a follow-up email so you have all this information. But yeah, those are the 2 pieces of homework. Just 5 trees in the database to get a little practice with it, and do an activity for any one of them, which is great, or any one of the 3 activities for each of the 5 trees. We'd like you to take a look at the worksheet and send it back by Tuesday. As I said, the first person to share it back will get a prize from the New York Urban Field Station for some coveted swag from the Forest Service Urban Field Station. And that's a wrap, folks. So today, again, to recap, we went through just how to use the app, some of the data collection points. Next week, we're going to dive more into the project management dashboard, and we're going to do that by walking through setting up a project so you can see exactly how it's done. But yeah, that's where we're at today. So I'd love to just could we open the last 5 minutes for questions? I do know that Jen had another question that we will get back to you on. Oh, looks like Rich is already responding. Thank you, Rich. Awesome. And thank you to those that are trying to help me with the technology. Awesome. I would love to see faces, and I'd love to hear any questions that folks may have. If anybody's willing. Hey, Sarah Lowe. Awesome. Hello, Laura. All right. Questions. I know everybody's muted. Matt, is it possible to unmute folk, or to make it possible for them to unmute? It looks like Laura has a question.
It's already possible. They should be able to unmute themselves if they have a question.
I just did it for you, Laura.
Thank you. The host had to unmute us, Matt. So that was
You already were.
so that was it. So Rachel, first off, thank you for going through that app. So I work with Matt at Arbor Day, and we do events, and we require, after an event takes place and trees are planted, for us not only to get information on the trees that were planted, how many trees were planted, but then also the maintenance that takes place. My question is there a way within the app to pull data out if somebody else has entered it in?
Yes, absolutely. And we can do that through the project management dashboard.
Okay.
And that's something that Michelle will show next week.
Great, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. So, and just to be clear, adding batch data needs to be done through Rich, Michelle, or Chuck, just because we need to make sure that the data is clean or properly formatted. But anybody can take data down.
Got it. Yeah, I think that would be our request, would be to get the data out of it once
Absolutely.
you guys put it in. Thank you.
Absolutely.
You can mute me again, or I'll mute myself.
Thanks for that question, and thanks to those who asked questions through the workshop. And other questions?
It's Jen.
Comments?
I feel like such an annoyance. But so how many trees are in the database so far? Did you say that?
I did not. We're up to, Rich, what is it, 90,000?
Yeah, just over 90,000 trees in the database from somewhere around 13 cities.
That's great. And the cities that have done it, you guys have approached to kind of pilot this with you? I mean, the Charlotte City Landscape Division plants all street trees. It seems like it'd be such a great opportunity for them.
Yeah, so I can answer that. So primarily we've been working through the North America Cities Network of the Nature Conservancy, and that's how we've gotten to most of our cities. So mostly Nature Conservancy connections, that's been part of this project and this cost share agreement that we have. But that's part of the reason that we're here to Alliance for Community Trees, because we want to go beyond what the Nature Conservancy's network do. So thrilled that you're here, Jen.
Well, I'm just with Tree Charlotte, not the city, but we work with the city. So I'll definitely let the arborists know.
Yeah, totally. And just to be clear, we've worked with tree groups, we've worked with municipalities. For example, we've trained up the Milwaukee staff. So, you know, we've worked with NGOs as well as municipal government groups to do this kind of work. So we're kind of, and hey, I see Tim Wenskis. Hey, Tim, one of our friends from New York, and Trinity from Chicago. Hi, everybody. Well, listen, I really hope that we will see majority of you next week, because I think next week is where the rubber really is going to meet the road. We will walk through setting up a project. We'll talk, that next week is going to be much more interactive, much more discussion based. And we want you to bring your ideas and your thoughts to the conversation using that worksheet, just to kind of jog your memory, your thoughts about what we might need to talk about to set up a project. Turning it back over to you, Matt.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for attending this session today. Just another quick reminder, this was recorded, and just like we sent out the recording yesterday afternoon, you will get that sent your way as well. And that is it for us today. Again, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you back here next week. Have a good Thursday, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.